Excellent.
Merci. Donc, la parole est à toi, Marika Demers.
Merci Nabila pour l'invitation, puis aux cliniciens, aux usagers du CIUS Centre-Ouest de me donner cette opportunité. So from now on, I'm going to switch to English, but feel free during the question rounds to ask your questions in French. There's no problem. So today we'll talk about wearable technologies from the perspective of people who have had a stroke, clinicians, as well as researchers. So I'm starting off. I don't work for a company. I don't have any conflict of interest to declare. So if you're asking me for recommendation for devices, it's based on my research and clinical experience that I'm going to talk about it. So Demila already provided you with an outline of what we're going to be talking about today. So I'll talk about just a brief overview of how can we characterize the disparity between capacity and performance. We'll talk about some of the benefits of wearable technologies and some of the insights we can gain from using this low-cost wearable technology. We'll dive into interventions, and we're going to finish with the perspective of experts on the use of wearable technology and where are we headed for the future. So, despite extensive progress in the field of stroke rehabilitation, there's still many challenges that remains that limit long-term recovery for people with stroke and consequently participation and quality of life. One of these important challenges is the transfer of skills, what we gain in therapy from the to the real life context where those skills are needed. For many stroke survivors, we can see a disparity between capacity, what we're measuring in the clinic, versus what people can actually do, what they choose to do in their everyday activities. To give you an example, in a study by Kramer and Stewart, 71% of people who have had a stroke who scored perfectly on this scale, they got 100%. They still 71% reported having difficulty using their arm and then hands in everyday activities. Clinically, therapists may observe a difference between what an individual can do during the standardized clinical assessment, for example, using the CAHI or the Chidok Master, versus what they're actually doing in their daily life. This disparity is often named this learn and use phenomenon. However, there's no evidence that it is a learning phenomenon per se. So another term that you can see in the literature is acquired not use. In a recent Delphi study, learn and use was defined as a discrepancy, a retained motor capacity, which can be retrieved when requested, and that spontaneous use of this motor capacity in daily life, a discrepancy that develops due to experiences in inept or non-productive perceived attempts to use that capacity. And it is often accompanied by compensatory movement behaviors identified in other body parts. This group of experts also recommended to perform longitudinal assessments, so multiple time points done by an interdisciplinary team, including the patient and their families. They also suggested to use wearable technology as a useful method to provide valuable information into this phenomenon. In this perspective paper, Ballester et al. Proposed two cycles, the virtuous cycle of recovery and this vicious cycle of recovery, specifically for people with mild to moderate motor impairments. First, we're going to start looking at the vicious cycle. Can you see my mouse if I move it around? Yeah. Okay. So let's start with decrease in arm use. Then, no, we're going to start with loss of motor function. So people may have difficulty using their arms in everyday activities due to their stroke. This will lead to negative outcomes. For example, there's an object that's going to fall off, or it's going to take more time. This is going to lead the person to decrease their arm use in everyday activities due to it didn't really work very well. This is going to provide a lack of training and then contribute to this cycle of lost motor function, negative outcomes, decreased arm use, and then continues. On the other side, we can think of the virtuous cycle of stroke recovery, where an improved motor function can lead to positive outcomes. So, for example, people are using their arms a bit more, they're receiving feedback, which prompt them to use their arm more. And then with this feedback, they can measure, oh, I'm actually using my arm more than I'm thinking. then this will encourage them to actually use the arm and hand more in everyday activities, provided heightened expectations of success. And then this, just using your arm in everyday activities is a form of self-training, which is repeated. So this will lead to improved motor function and this continue this virtuous cycle of stroke recovery. So we see using wearable technology as fitting with this virtuous cycle, where we're really encouraging improvements in everyday life. So new advances in technology are promising for stroke rehabilitation to address this disparity between capacity and performance. Today, I'll be speaking specifically about wearable technology and mobile health technologies and how they can be combined with regular therapy or conventional rehabilitation. So wearable technology can have two main aims. On one side, you have the assessment. So wearable technology provide information about what people are doing when they're not with you in therapy. What are they doing the other 23 hours of the day? They can provide information about walking performance, mobility, or about how they use their arm and hand to interact with objects in their environment. In the environment. Can also provide information about what people are doing in their real life. And this information is valuable to complement what we actually see in the clinic, what we're measuring. On the other side, wearable technology can also be used for treatment. So by providing feedback, for example, how many steps someone did in a day, can offer direct real-time feedback on activity and can encourage this healthy behavior. For example, if I did 3,000 steps and my goal is 5,000 steps, then I can start developing better behavior to reach my targeted goal. I also want to distinguish between, there's two grades of sensors. So there's those that are designed for consumers. So those are what you can buy at the general store. Anyone can buy these wearable devices. And then you have research grade sensors. So those are sensors that are meant specifically for research purposes. So they each have their own challenges. When thinking about consumer grade sensors, they're more affordable, easy to use, so you can just out of the box, you can use them. However, what we know from the literature is for people who have more severe impairments, those are not meant to measure movements in someone that doesn't have the same pattern as the general population. So for those with more severe motor impairments, the accuracy really diminishes. To give you an example, one of the Fitbit watches on steps counts for someone that walks lower than 0.7 meter per second, it captures only half the steps, so about 50%. Also, we don't really know how the data is analyzed or the algorithms that are used behind it. And often we cannot get access to this raw data to be able to understand better some of the behaviors. And then what you get out of the box is basically what you get. You cannot think of, oh, I would love to get this information. It's really hard to get other, or if the way the data is displayed isn't useful for your patient who may have aphasia, then we have very limited options for customization. Thinking about some of the challenges for research-grade wearable sensors, well, they're expensive. They're not meant for the general population. They take a very long time just to, you take your watch, you need to set it up, you need to enter your user profile, then you can give it to your participant. Then you take back the watch, you plug it, you extract the data, you process the data, and then you generate something you can do with this data. Often take a long time to set up. And then often one sensor isn't enough. So you need to put multiple ones on the body. So to help inform clinical care about, and we know this is something that keeps evolving. So it's moving rapidly. So we did a scoping review, and this was led by Camila Toriani-Passin, really looking at what are the measurement properties of wearable technology. Because it can be really challenging to choose the best devices or app for your practice. So we divided those in yellow, you're going to see commercial grade sensors. In in light green is non-commercial, so research-grade sensors. And then we also look at apps that are available on the phone. So, and we divided those for that measuring upper limb function, so arm and hand, those measuring walking ability, and then those measuring intensity. What we mean by intensity can be energy expenditure, so METs, for example, or we can be talking about lying versus sitting or sedentary positions. So what we found out is that there's very few commercial grade sensors that are available for the upper limb. We found but there was a lot of commercially available for the lower limb, which had some established validity and accuracy. We found that none of the systems really capture responsiveness or sensitivity to change, which is some limitation for the future. And then we found some apps that could be useful also, but those don't capture upper limb use. They really capture lower limb or sedentary behaviors. So when I'm talking about with clinicians, they often asking me, well, what about movement quality? Because wearable technology using inertial measurement unit capture acceleration in 3 axes, so X, Y, and Z, and the orientation of the sensors. So an important critique of wearable technology is that movement quality or the presence of compensatory movements are therefore not directly assessed. And you're right. In this study by Barth et al., they looked at the relationship between wearable technology and then they derived general compensatory movement scores. So they look at different compensatory movements and they gave a score whether these were present or not. But the author found a moderate relationship between compensatory strategies and sensor-derived data outside of the clinic. So this figure really shows you this little scatter plot of all the participants. So what it really tells us is that there's some aspects of movement quality that is captured with accelerometer data, but it's not perfect. So throughout this presentation, I'll show you some of the data we collected. That was we investigated a wearable technology system, but unfortunately, the company ended up discontinuing the product that we did. But just to guide you through the different steps, so from the company developed the technology, then we tested it in the lab setting to make sure it was accurate and usable for people with stroke. Then we did real-world testing to really assess feasibility, and we gathered perspective of people with stroke and clinicians as well as experts. For the purpose of today's presentation, I'll focus on the right side, so I'll focus on the feasibility and perspective of stroke survivors and clinicians. So looking at the real world, what we wanted to do is basically we asked participants to come in for 2 lab visits. First visits, we would do a few clinical tests to really characterize who are our stroke survivors. We provided them with instructions on how to wear the watch, how to charge it, because the battery required participants to charge it every night. So we gave them the instructions. We made sure that they were able to don and doff each of the sensors. So they had 2 on the wrists, 1 on each wrist and 1 on each ankle. And this system really captured upper limb use as well as mobility. Then for a week, participants were at home doing their typical activities, and we could follow their progress throughout the week. And then following back a week later, they would come back to the lab, bring back the devices. We did a few more tests to look at the perception of how it went in the previous week. And they knew we would generate a report, a movement report with how they did in the previous week. And then we wanted to understand the perspective about what they thought of this report, what information is meaningful or not. So from looking at this data, we look at the feasibility. So were people able to wear the device every day, charge it? Were they satisfied? Did they encounter any difficulties? So overall, we had 23 days with missing data, which represent about 11% of our entire data collection period. So some participants forgot to charge it. Some participants chose to not wear it on a day, and it's okay. And we also had technical issues with the sensors or with the server that hosted the data. So that's why we had about 87% of valid data. In terms of safety, some participants on one side, we put an elastic band to really ease the donning and doffing. But on the other side, we just put the typical silicone. And this was uncomfortable by many participants. So if we were to do the study again, everyone would get elastic band on both sides. And then we had a few unrelated adverse events. Someone got COVID after the week, so they couldn't come back. So these are part of safety. In terms of usability, we administered the system usability scale, which is a scale from 0 to 100, and the highest means the more usable. So how easy it is to use, how it is to learn about the system. So we got a rank of 85 out of 100, and typically wearable technology in the general population is closer to 80 out of 100. So we got a pretty high score in terms of usability. And you can see the quotes on the right side. So some participants said, "It was wonderful. I didn't mind one day doing it." And someone else said, "Having to understand that I was being monitored kept me motivated. I'm more aware of my movement. My affected side, I noticed it more so than last week." So for this week of data collection, we did not provide feedback during the week. Even though the sensors had the capability, we disabled all the feedback capability. So just the fact of wearing the sensor felt motivating for stroke survivors. So what kind of insights can we learn from wearable technology? So from our data, we look at some of the relationship between some of our clinical measures versus real life measures. And what I can tell you is that we have a moderate correlation with our clinical measures. The one that is more highly correlated is the Chedok Arm and Hand Activity Inventory, so the CAHI, because it's a bimanual outcome measure. So this one has a strong correlation with wearable sensor data. And then looking, for example, at the Fugl on the bottom. So this is a measure of capacity. So how much, and it can be similar to the Chedok McMaster. And then on the y-axis, you have the ratio, the paratic arm use ratio. What it means, a ratio of 1 means I use as much my less affected arm as my affected arm. So I use both arms about the same. And in the general population, we're roughly using both arms equally on a daily basis. So as we can see, the participants who had more severe impairments tended to use more their less affected arm to do daily activities as compared to those who were closer to the fully recovered on the scale, tended to use more symmetrically both of their arms. But as you can see, very few participants reached that ratio, that equal ratio. Then looking at the perception of stroke survivors, how much are they thinking they're using their arm versus how much are they actually using it? And again, we can see a moderate relationship between these two constructs, meaning that they're related, but then there's something we're capturing that is slightly different when we're using wearable technology as opposed to just using questionnaires, self-reported questionnaires. So another interesting results we got from the literature is in the study by Chen et al. So they looked at combining wearable technology with an assessment method called ecological momentary assessment. What it is prompts that it's text messages that you're receiving on your phone that ask you questions about how you feel currently. Which arm are you using? Are you in a public setting? Are you in a private setting? Are you with other people around you? How do you feel your mood? So this work established that in stroke survivors with right hemispheric stroke perceive a positive social environment. So being with people that you feel confident with and feeling this higher feeling of self-efficacy were associated with greater paratic arm use in the daily context. However, despite their hypotheses, they did not find that mood was associated with paratic arm movement. So mood was not a predictive of upper limb use. Another team looked at, could wearable technology be a biomarker for recovery? So they recruited participants in the acute stage of stroke recovery, so in the first week post-stroke. And they looked at spontaneous arm use. And what they saw is two different profiles. So you had those participants who would spontaneously use their arm in their first week post-stroke compared to those who would not use it. And these two groups really looked different 3 months post-stroke, which suggests that this spontaneously using your arm right after your stroke can be a good predictor for stroke recovery. But more work remains to be done. Switching target from assessment to interventions using wearable technology. Well, since most of you are clinicians, you will not be surprised when I'm telling you that there's strong evidence to support the provision of extrinsic feedback to elicit motor learning processes and improve motor recovery. There's growing body of evidence that extrinsic feedback can positively influence motivation, self-efficacy, and compliance. So we know that feedback, whether it is verbal, tactile feedback, or just auditory, like just cueing someone, is really useful. So in this systematic review on wearable sensors, this one wasn't specific for stroke. It was for upper limb rehabilitation in general across population. What they look, and if I'm directing your attention towards this wearable technology, but really wearable sensors, so IMUs, most of the feedback is offered visually. There's a little bit of haptic feedback, but it's mostly visual display. And most systems attempt, either intentionally or intuitively, to indicate progress towards a goal, an approach that is known as knowledge of results. So to give you an example of what sensor-derived data can look like, this is data from our work. So this is a participant with a mild cerebral artery ischemic stroke on the right hemisphere with mild motor impairments. So on the Fugl-Meyer, they scored a 64 out of 66 on the Fugl-Meyer. So looking at the movement report for this participants, and he walks without an assistive device, sorry. So we can see their left arm is the affected side. So they barely use their affected side in everyday life. They mostly use their dominant right arm. And we can see this mostly every hour of the day. In terms of steps, this is someone that walks mostly inside their house and often sometimes go outside, but not too often. So does about 3,000 steps a day. And we can also get information about stance time symmetry. So how much time we're spending on one leg versus the other leg. And it's an indication of movement symmetry during gait. So using movement reports like this, we generated a few additional slides, but we asked stroke survivors what they thought of each of these reports to see, can they be understood easily? And are they intuitive and encouraging them to move more, so actionable? So what we found out is that most of the plots were easy to understand and encourage movements. We saw one difference. We tried one plot that was more research-based, that wasn't as accessible, and this one wasn't really appreciated by participants. But the other slide, the other graphs were pretty much, we really expected one graph to be, everyone likes this type of movement display. But it ended up that some people like one, other people like others. Same thing for mobility. Mobility is always slightly easier to understand than arm use, but we're quite satisfied with our measures are easy to understand and encourage movement across participants with aphasia, that English was not their first language, and we had participants with some mild to moderate cognitive disorders. So we asked them, because we wanted to know which one's the best, we asked them to rank each of the plots. So the two winning plots are at the bottom, but really we couldn't really get one that was preferred by everyone. So at the bottom is really the hourly, and same thing for both of their arms, and then hourly steps. But as you can see, their preference is pretty, yeah, we didn't get what we wanted, which is interesting too. What it tells me is that we need to provide a variety of graphs and people choose the one they like to interpret. So we did quantitative data, but we also did qualitative data. So we had three main themes or ideas that emerged from the data. One of them was that perceived benefits of the wearable technology to really encourage behavior change. However, there's a caveat for those with more severe motor impairments. They did not find it was useful. So it would be better for those with mild to moderate motor impairments because participants, and you'll see some of the quotes, said, like, I'm using my arm as much as I can. So one participant said, oh, the report was really helpful. These graphs and these scales help you with your movement and your motivation because it inspires me to try even more, to do better than this. I'm impressed with myself. I can't wait to share this with my family. Someone else said, I wasn't using my paretic arm and hand at all. After you started recording, I think I kind of something turned on and said, you know what? It's time to move your hand, move the arms. It encouraged me to use my arm more. And a woman that had more severe impairment said, for me, the graphs are not telling me anything. So my arm is what it is. That's hard to motivate somebody. So what participants told us is that they don't want generic feedback. They really want feedback that is based on their individual goals. They also value, so the experience, having an experienced clinicians with them to give them goals to say, okay, next week we're going to try this and try to find ways to problem solve with your therapist. For example, if they don't know how to use their arm more, then the therapist can provide suggestion. They also loved having the clinician there as a way to provide accountability. So again, some quotes from our participants. A woman said, if we're using the sensors, and I would assume maybe you're using personalized feedback in conjunction with your PT to set up this week's goal. Another woman said, because of who I am, I like to do well. I like to be obedient and do what the professionals are saying. And then a trans man said, I would like to meet with a therapist to review overall what I'm doing, because I like encouragements. So the goal of wearable technology is not to replace standard therapy, is really meant to complement and give more tools for clinicians. So looking at what clinicians are thinking about wearable technology. So this is the work of two of my OT students, so Caroline and Ouillard. So they did this, not this summer, the previous one. So we ran two 90-minute focus groups with clinicians from CIUS Centre Sud and CIUS Centre Ouest. And we had in total 6 OTs and PTs with an average of 20.5 years of clinical experience. So we asked them questions about what are the feedback characteristics you would like to guide your clinical decision making, and how relevant is the data to your clinical practice. So there's 3 main ideas that came out from the clinicians meeting. One, they really perceived that wearable technology could provide clinically relevant data. It provides an objective measures of real life functioning. It can help guide clinical decisions. It can promote self-management and engagement of participants and promote energy management principles. When you see someone is doing too much, then your education, or when you see some people are taking too much breaks, and can be used to really offer personalized recommendations. Then they talked about, well, each stroke survivor is unique. So we need to have personalization options. People are very heterogeneous. We need a variety of visual graphs, and we need multiple option of feedback type, frequency, mode, and delivery. And they really felt that there was a therapeutic value of providing real-time feedback to encourage behavior change and promote healthier habits. And they talk about providing or shifting the intervention to the real-life context. So from this work, we have key recommendations. So it would be to create a mobile app for clinicians that allows them for remote monitoring, and they would love to have customization features for feedback delivery. In terms of experts, so we talked about what stroke survivors are thinking, talked about what clinicians are perceiving. Then we wanted to look at experts or researchers who have done this work for the past 10, 15 years. So we ran two 90-minute focus groups with researchers with an expertise with wearable technology. And this was led by Dr. Amelia Kane. So in terms of topics, we focus on how relevant is it to capture data outside the lab or the clinical setting, and then what are the benefits and pitfalls of wearable technology. And we really wanted to reflect on what is the future of this to guide the implementation in clinical practice. So again, three main ideas came out of it. So the first one is that the objective assessment of activity performance, real life performance, is critical for understanding how patients are moving at home and also for clinical decision making. So they also talked about how relevant the data was to really inform care and to help counterbalance some of the limitations of our traditional outcome measures. However, despite all the promise of wearable technology, I still think that the benefits is not commensurated with the added hassle. So there's still a long way to go. So some of the devices are still harder to use, they take a long time. So we need to improve device usability. We need to think about how we can incorporate this into clinical workflow. And how can we incorporate the data into the medical file? There's also some caveat related to technology immaturity. So it's an evolving field that is still has a long way to go. So as the third idea is really about this importance of collaborating with people from the industry, academia, and clinicians and people with lived experience to move forward on like all front together. So they talked also about the importance of providing training and education on wearable technology from at the university level so that future clinicians already are aware of this technology. So let me end by giving you an example of how wearable technology could be used in stroke clinical practice and research. So how we see this, it would be a short term. We don't see participants or patients wearing a wearable watch for years because we know people are going to stop wearing it after a little while. So we see this as a short term. So we develop an intervention where we provide feedback about performance. This is coupled with tips on how to self-manage at home and guidance from clinicians on how to solve some of the barriers the person identifies. So if they have challenges walking outside in the snow, so maybe what do we need to do to solve this? And then provide feedback based on personalized goals. And then this would be, for example, for a month, and then the person has developed healthier habits. They are discharged home, they continue with their behavior, and maybe in 6 months, you start to see a slight decline in function, or they go back to their old habits. Then we do a little booster dose of wearable technology, and then they go back to healthier behavior. So to conclude, wearable technology can provide valuable information about the real world performance. The data that is derived from wearable technology can offer intuitive and actionable feedback for stroke survivors. However, we need to provide feedback consistent with personalized goals. It needs to be given with therapy. It cannot be given alone and think that it's going to replace therapy. And we need to be strategic about how to integrate this into the clinical workflow. I'm ending by telling you that the field grows very rapidly. There's always new opportunities. So this is just the beginning of this technology. So I'll end by acknowledging some of the funding sources for the work I presented, my collaborators, and all our research participants. So I want to thank you, and I welcome any questions. My email is on the slide if you would like to have a copy of the presentations or want to email me in the future. You don't know which devices to pick for your clinical practice, we can have a discussion. I'll be happy to.
Merci beaucoup pour cette belle présentation. On va arrêter justement l'enregistrement, peut-être